I don't know if the CEO of the Fortune 500 companies are the smartest people on earth. What they certainly are is they are the most resilient, toughest, unbreakable people that you're going to be finding. But I was a bit of a rara avis back then, so it's like, what are you doing? You're an engineer. What are you doing in finance? Well, here I am, almost 30 years later. Practically everything in business is about the result and the process that got you there.
Let me tell you something. Everybody sells scholarships, but none of them are guaranteed. Well, Secure My Scholarship sells guaranteed scholarships. Check out the link below and get up to a 50% guaranteed scholarship.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Diaries podcast. We have a special guest with us today. He's the father of 3 kids. He's coaches under 7 rugby team, and also he happens to be the CFO of Accenture previously. And now he's graduated onto a bigger role at Accenture Global. Hi Mario, how are you doing? Is that introduction good?
That's perfect. Thank you very much, guys, for having me.
It's our pleasure as well. Mario, give us a little bit information on what you do at Accenture.
Up until very recently, as the CFO of, I was the CFO of the Middle East, which goes basically GCC plus Egypt and some adjacencies. And I have recently moved into the office of the COO and the corporate level role with the focus on strategic initiatives to drive profit and growth across the company. So this is not for the Middle East, but expanded to the 70 plus countries that Accenture operates in. It's a very different flavor of what I was doing, but leveraging what I have done over the past many years.
Speaking of your past, right? You started out as an engineer, right, at Exxon, and then all of a sudden now you were a CFO. Now you're working with COO. What was that trajectory like? Where did you find out, hey, maybe engineering's not something I want to continue with? Because we come from India, right? And in India, there's when you're a child, there are like 2 career paths. You either become an engineer or a doctor. And a lot of people I've noticed, like, they study engineering, but a lot of people move out of engineering, and everybody has different reasons. What was your reason for moving out of engineering?
Right. Okay. So probably I'll step back for a second on how I got to engineering. Right. And to be fair, it was a bit of a chance that I studied engineering. And it was out of, I wanted to do something that would give me certain level of flexibility beyond the 5 years at university. And my generation, I am substantially older than you guys. And yes, back then, careers were very tight compartments. You studied one career and you would stay in that track for a long period. And it was early 90s. You were not born back then, right? And industrial engineering was the one that had that flavor of, okay, you can do a lot of things with a certain common ground education. So I graduated from university, joined Exxon. My job was to build gas stations. I was on the field building gas stations, doing some environmental work on the field. And one day, I happened to work with the planning team at Exxon, and one of them told me, listen, you know what? You do seem to have a good nose for the business. Why don't you try something different in your career? I took that advice. Exxon at the time was the largest corporation in the world. I was fortunate enough to work in many very large corporations. over my career. And I decided to move out and start working for a cable company in finance. It was probably one of the toughest things that I have done in my career, because moving from building gas stations to the, let's say, more abstract world of finance, it was rather difficult. But I have to say that engineering background, plus having been on the field, complemented very well my finance career, because I was fortunate enough to build a common language with the people that were doing the field work while I was doing all the financial work. And it was very interesting to see, at least from my perspective, how I was the only engineer in finance in Argentina back then. There weren't a lot. Most of the engineers, as I said, they were focused on that very tight compartment that engineering was. As we moved into early 2000s, that changed, and you could see more and more, and now you see a lot of engineers in finance. But I was a bit of a rara avis back then, so it's like, what are you doing? You're an engineer. What are you doing in finance? Well, here I am, almost 30 years later.
Yeah, I feel like we see a lot of people with technical backgrounds switch over to finance or anything that could be supply chains, operations, or something like that. And it probably benefits them in the long run. It might be tougher when you first adjust. Probably benefits them because A, you understand the people that are working for you and really executing and delivering these operations. But B, you're so used to such a technical aspect, right? Like engineering, for example, which requires a certain amount of perseverance and hard work and understanding on a different level, like, I guess in terms of your intellectual ability as well, the amount you put into it, that you can really draw on the same types of hard work that you've used there to get into finance. And finance really, once you have a fundamental background, as you've probably been aware, then it's just about building up from there.
Well, yes. Actually, the one thing that I always say engineering gave me, I mean, I could say that I was very good at quantum mechanics. Quite frankly, I don't use quantum mechanics every day. However, what engineering gave me was a way of thinking in terms of result, process. And in the end, practically everything in business is about the result and the process that got you there. I'm not talking process in terms of moving a box from this rack to this other rack. I'm talking in terms of the decision-making process. And this is probably where engineering has come. It's very handy into building that thought process.
Yeah, I think you strike something there because, for example, when you learn physics, as you did when you were in university as well, the first thing I think you learn, and it probably was the same back then, was the scientific method, right? The method of inquisition. And that quite literally is, why has this happened and how can we recreate it to make sure that the exponential result of this repeats itself, right? And if you draw on that inspiration and take it into business, you can probably produce results and build on them over and over.
Now, well, and this is one of the things that I have learned over my career. You know, again, back then, engineering was this sort of dehumanizing type of career. And for what it's worth, when everyone thinks of a finance professional, the archetype is the number crusher that is always thinking in terms of numbers, which is not necessarily true, right? There is a portion that is true, but it's not entirely true. And what I have learned over the years is that same thought process needs to be translated into human behavior. You cannot separate a decision from the people that are going to execute it. And that goes to, one thing that, again, when I reflect on my career and the trajectory, moving out from engineering university and then starting to build gas stations that are buildings, they have no feelings, they give you no feedback other than, well, the pumps are working or they're not working, and you interact with the contractors, to then moving to a less industrial organization like Accenture, in which what we do is people. Our assets is people. And my job has been for the past almost 20 years to work with people. And then the job description changed from, well, there is this product that we need, or this result that we need to achieve, working with contractors. Here's the plan. I'll see you when the gas station is built, to having to interact with people and explaining that thought process, and helping them develop their own line of thinking, so that they can be at their best, most innovative, because in the end, that's what every organization should be striving for, that their people are autonomous, that they are innovative, and that they are within the degrees of freedom that any company can give, free enough to experiment and then deliver the best results.
Which leads me to the biggest question a lot of people would have, right? What does Accenture actually do?
Oh, well, I have to say, I've tried to explain this to my parents for almost 20 years. I don't think they understand what we do. If you look at the official definition, it says Accenture works at the intersection of business, technology, experience, processes, and consulting.
Just a bunch of jargons and...
Exactly. That's the official definition. When we put this actually more on the ground, what Accenture does is, it is, and I don't want to sound too corporate on this, but it is probably the best business partner that any company can have to transform their business. Whether it is on their processes, whether it is on their strategy, the execution of that strategy, and that would involve the technology piece, infrastructure, software platforms, to training, and then run all those processes. So it's, to give some numbers, it's a 750,000 people organization. It's the largest consulting company in the world. I've been at Accenture for almost 20 years, as I said. There isn't a single day in which Accenture does not add either a new service, a new offering, or something new to the catalog of things that we do. So it is a company that demands, to some extent, that you are constantly up to date. So if you asked me this same question 15 years ago, the answer would have been probably more precise. Now, the breadth of things that Accenture does at the micro level, we do engineering services, for example, which, well, it's a consulting company. Engineering services, how does this work? We design products for our customers. So there are a number of services out there that you wouldn't necessarily relate to Accenture. Accenture is one of the most awarded digital agencies in the world. We win awards at Cannes. Accenture at Cannes. What does it have to do? Well, Accenture does, effects for series. If you watch Lost in Space, those effects were done by Accenture. So there are a lot of things that you wouldn't relate to a consulting company, and that's one of the beauties of the company.
And what does a CF get in a company that does a diverse set of services dealing one day?
Well, that's going to have a more definitive answer. The vast majority of the time is spent on the commercial side of the company, which is working with the teams that are then in turn working with the clients, helping them devise the best commercial proposals to them, leveraging the strength that the company has, whether it is because we have a strength in our P&L or in our balance sheet that we can then translate into a better business case for the client. I'll give you an example. If we have a lot of cash, right, then, well, we may be able to finance our clients in a way that others wouldn't, right? Or let's say that we have a very good year on profitability. Well, we may decide to invest in some of our clients, giving them a discount on the price. And this balance is what I spent most of my time, more than 50 or more of my % of my time spent on, okay, what's the best balance working with those teams, working with the COO in deciding, okay, this is the cluster of deals that we want to pursue. This is how we're going to be doing. These are the rules that we will be applying to them. Then the other 40 to 50%, there was a part that I always liked, which was the institutional one, attending forums, spending time with other CFOs and finance organizations, telling them about our transformational experience. That's probably the part that I enjoy the most, like coming here. And then came probably a 20% time on people, talking to them every single day. My team was 20-something people here in the region, and then another 50-ish spread between Spain, India, and the Philippines. And I would spend hours a week speaking to all of them individually. Because in the end, as I said, our assets is people. So you have to dedicate time to them.
I think even as CFO, a lot of what you're saying is based around establishing, maintaining, and improving your relationships, right, with people, with internal people as well as external clients, right? And let's pull it back for a second, because that I think plays into what you did in Latin America as well, right? So we looked into it a bit, and for example, when you joined Accenture, you led about 12 people and $65 million in revenue, right, in your first year. And if you fast forward 8 years from that, you were leading 550 people with over $200 million in revenue. So not only from a monetary aspect, but also from a people aspect. That was a huge jump. You're managing 500 plus more people, right? So how did that, because I think this is important in your philosophy as well, how did that tie into your development of your management style?
As an engineer, we think of, as I said, process, result. But the result is always in terms of a problem. We are wired as engineers to think of how do we solve a problem. At the time, when I was asked to take that role, we had an attrition problem. A lot of people were leaving. I'm not talking 50% attrition. The target was X, and we were probably X plus 5 or 6%. And I spoke to all the managers and senior managers that what's going on? People are disengaged. It's a salary problem. Well, I don't always believe that money is the driver for anyone to stay in an organization. So that's why I engaged all 500. And I spoke to them, and within 6 months, their attrition had been cut by half. Because it was a matter of, okay, you have something to say, tell me, and we'll see what we can do. If we can solve it, we'll solve it. If we cannot solve it, there is, we'll speak about it, and you will have all at your disposition to, take an informed decision. The worst thing that could happen back then was that anyone at the team was left with, oh, no one is listening to me, right? I cannot make a rational decision and then by default, the decision becomes, I leave me. So, and this is why I spent a lot of time talking to people, because it's about, in any business, if someone tells you, people are a secondary element to our business, they are wrong. There are some things that are changing that, quite frankly, I don't necessarily have a position on where we will go with the surge of Gen AI and some of...
But I think that culture makes a difference, right? Like the fact that, hey, something's there, I want to speak to you, that has more attributed to what your like how many people are leaving the organization more than hey, if I'm getting like 10% raise every year, 14% raise. I think that culture is like the biggest driving force, right?
And then speaking of my career journey, I always have to, and in all of the companies that I have worked with, I have to be very thankful to those leaders that I worked for. All right, and in all of the companies that I have been, I always have 1, 2, or 3 people that have inflected my career in a positive way. But I also have to say that relationship wasn't in all cases driven by them. It was also driven by me. And probably as a that we were speaking about, okay, what are the things that your audience can take out of this? Speak up. You have to engage the more senior people always in a constructive manner, right? Complaining is easy. My children complain every day, right? But when you're in an organization, in a corporation, engaging senior leaders in a constructive manner on their experiences, on what advice they can give you, they will help you. And I do not know any leader out there that would say no to giving an advice. Style of the advice may change, right? You may have people that are rougher than others, or people that may be more forthcoming or not. But that is probably the number one thing, because it creates 2 things. Number one, it helps you create an environment in which you have information to make a decision, number one. Number 2, it creates a bond beyond the transactional interaction that happens in every human interaction. And finally, it opens a number of doors that may be completely out of your line of sight. And I definitely recommend everyone within your companies to try and find an internal mentor, whether it is formal or informal. That's a different problem, right? Because that will give you a good sense of where you can go to. And we spoke about corporate careers being a marathon and not a 100-meter sprint. But I honestly, all of those people that do not have someone within the corporation that can help them see what's the path ahead of them, those will consider that is a 100-meter sprint. And there is a point in your life in which definitely 100-meter sprint may not necessarily be the best thing, right? When you're young, it's perfectly fine. You have to experiment because that's how things have to go.
How does one approach a career at Accenture or as a consultant? What is the step forward? Because, if it's engineering, you do go to university, do engineering. If you want to be a doctor, you go to university, do your pre-meds, whatever, right? What is the career path for a consultant, especially in a company like Accenture?
I would probably say that it's less about the career. It's more about the talent that you may have. We have MDs, the medical doctors at Accenture. We have people that have studied philosophy, literature. I mean, things that are completely unrelated to what you would think is the technology core of Accenture. There is a lot of people that are, writers. So I would probably say that if you're thinking of approaching a career in consulting, there are different type of consulting companies. There is practically roles for every type of career that you have studied in consulting. It's a fast evolving business. Our clients, they are always demanding the latest, the newest. And if there is one trend that it's out there, and this has been happening for a number of years, right? Since the past probably 20 to 25 years, the human centricity of all the company's products and services is now at the forefront of what they do. And when you put humans at the center, and probably, you may hint some Steve Jobs there and Apple style, right? Which a product needs to be human-centric. When you put humans at the core of what you're doing, we have different interests. You may have more structured, businesses, say oil and gas, in which definitely there are places in. But you know what? If you go to a gas station, the experience of, having someone putting some petrol in your car, or going into the drive and wash, that's a very human experience, and you may not need an engineering designing the most. Well, you definitely need an engineering designing the best layout for the pumps and all that. But then, how the people there interact with you, well, you may need someone that has a different kind of experience, and a consultant that is not an engineering may help you in deciding, okay, how can we make our clients more comfortable in their experience of buying chocolate at the convenience store. So again, if you want to start a career in consulting, I would probably suggest think of your talents, number one. Look at what are the companies that would fit the most of that. And again, there are a number of boutique firms that may not be the big names out there, but they have great consulting services. Of course, I would attract anyone to Accenture. That would be the easy answer. But then also, you have to know that the consultant's life is very difficult. Okay? It's very difficult, not because you get whipped around, but because you are constantly tested by your clients. You're permanently tested. The clients are always testing your knowledge, what new value can you put on the table? How can you help them be better? Mhm. And that requires a very specific type of mindset. You have to be relentless. Mhm. You have to be a very good communicator. I'm horrible at building PowerPoints, so I know. That doesn't mean that as a consultant you have to be good at PowerPoint, but you have to be able to articulate and communicate. So that's when it becomes very tough, because you have to meet expectations permanently.
I think that's also where like some of the criticisms of consulting also comes in, right? Like because of how very different businesses are, and not everybody is expert in everything, sort of a situation, right? How does a company like Accenture deal with that situation, right? Like say for example, I am a consultant placed in an oil and gas company, but for IT in oil and gas company. IT for oil and gas company may be different from an IT for a SaaS company, right? So how do you define, hey, this consultant is good for this particular job? Because again, as Accenture, you can't have, even if you have a huge workforce, you can't hire every single person who is expert in every industry, every technology that's available. How do you deal with that? How does Accenture deal with that?
So I'll split the question in two. Mhm. The first part is, for organizations the size of Accenture, scale matters, because the availability of talent out there is very relevant. And definitely we and many of the other consulting firms can bid on different types of work, overlapping services in multiple places of the world because of scale. And experience, and being partners with, let's say, any of the leading platforms out there. Those partnerships help. The second point is, it can be specific to how this is tackled, but it also applies to even how you run a country, if you want, and it is training. With the speed of change in technology and reinvention of businesses, and how they are disrupted practically on a daily basis, permanent training, learning, and keeping people up to date becomes an imperative. It's the same with education in a country, right? If you have a 16th century educational system, you're completely off the market as a country, in terms of placing your people as a workforce. So in this case, this is where permanent training becomes extremely important, right? And even if your company does not offer that kind of training, this is where we all have an individual responsibility with our own careers to be always up to date. And that may also open other doors.
You also spoke a little bit about how human-centric your approach is, right? And as a bunch of consultants sitting together, how are you approaching, the word that's been on everyone's lips in the last year, for example, generative AI, or the integration of tech into your own internal operations? How is Accenture really approaching this?
Well, Accenture has a very strong Gen AI framework. I would invite anyone to go look at it. It's public in our site. Stepping out of Accenture for a second, Gen AI, at least from my perspective, and probably a shared opinion, is the biggest thing that I will see in my professional career. is the most transformative, impactful technology that I will probably see. Well, I thought you're going to laugh at it. When I first came into university, we didn't even have internet. So I grew up with internet expanding. Now that I am way older, I see this new technology, Gen AI, whose adoption rate is outpacing anything that we have seen in the past. Mm-hmm. And I have a firm belief that we are just scratching the surface of what it can do and how much it will change our lives. Mm-hmm.
Do you think generative AI can we've had this conversation as young people, Gen AI can do most of the basic tasks, right? Like ChatGPT can generate your scripts, things, all these things. So as a junior level, we're thinking, hey, what is my scope of work if generative AI takes in all my jobs, right? A question that we often forget to ask is like, can generative AI take the jobs of C-level executives, right? Because at the end of the day, right, like the C-level executives' work is not to do the nitty-gritties, but to take the higher decisions. If a computer can do all these processes, thousands of computations in matter of seconds, where does a C-level executive fit in an environment where generative AI can take on?
I mean, you're speaking of the extreme case, which is the Terminator 2 scenario, right? In which, AI takes over everything, and or the Wall-E scenario in which, AI takes over and we human beings are, just transiting, as organic life. I definitely believe that there is going to be a change in how C-level, or there is already undergoing, a change in how C-level will work. Mm-hmm. There are some things that I see on my day-to-day that are impacted by Gen AI. But there is one thing that we also have to remember, at least from my perspective, and probably if you talk to someone that is an AI expert and says, Marius can be wrong. But this is still a human world. And for as long as we are still around, humans will always have a value. Mm-hmm. And that is probably the one thing that we do not have to forget. Mm-hmm. Will Gen AI disrupt many of the jobs out there? Yes. Mm-hmm. Will it be the end of work? No. This is a philosophical position from Mario Barilli, right? I'm not referring to anything related to the company that I work for, but personally, I still believe that we humans have a value, that human interaction has a value. Mm-hmm. Although it's more difficult every day to segregate human from machine interaction. Mm-hmm. But, we being live, sitting here, has a value. Mm-hmm. Sharing experiences has a value. A machine will be able to articulate an experience, but it would not have been a real experience. Mm-hmm. It can create an advice. It can design an advice that may be meaningful to you, right? I'm not saying it will not. But for as long as we are around, I believe that a conversation with a human being will continue to be very relevant. I don't want to bore anyone from your audience, but if you read Isaac Asimov, I'm a huge fan of him. I'm a bit nerdy when it comes to this type of things. He, in one of his novels, in Foundation, he thought of a world in which humans were far apart, and we interbred with machines. And the population was decaying. I don't think we're going to get there. I believe that we will thrive even more as a species.
Do you think maybe generative AI and all these new technologies, there is some sort of a recency bias in way we overvalue the impact, right? So there is, right, like even if you think about, there is this book, I can't quite remember the author's name, but it's called 23 Things Wrong with Capitalism. Okay, now again, that's it's a provocative title, but there is a chapter in the book that says that we tend to overvalue things that happen in the past. So for example, if we have a normal conversation, we were talking about the internet, right? We would think the internet had the most impact on how we operate as a human being. But if you really look at it, the washing machine and a dishwasher had probably more impact considering how many people it brought into the workforce, right? So I think that recency bias does play a role in the fear and the anxiety over what is going to happen to my role. But that overvaluation also has like another impact in which how companies are looking at it, right? Like for example, I was working with a company, full disclosure, right? I was working with a company where we were thinking about, hey, do we really need a designer? Can we just use generative AI to replace this thing? And that is probably that extreme view of things that causes that panic, right? In a scenario like this, right? Does Accenture, or even in your role, like you have children, how do you kind of tell these people, that your children or your employees or your subordinates, that Gen AI is here to stay, but at the same time, this is not something we have to be so afraid of because there is a lot of bias towards how we look at AI?
This, from my perspective, it has two angles to look at. One is there is a responsible use of AI. And responsible use of AI encompasses a number of things, but one of those is that AI is probably the best companion that we professionals can have. We should not be afraid of a companion. We should be afraid of a companion if that companion gives us the wrong advice. And that happens in every order of our life. So that's why, that responsible use is extremely important. The second, probably it's more of a learning curve on how are we going to use that companion. And I was having this conversation with, I'm already giving advice to my friends, my university friends' children that are going now into university. But we were speaking about this last week. He wanted to pursue a career as a motor designer. He wants to be the next Pininfarina, right? Hopefully he will, or my fellow countryman Pagani. And he was like, well, but now with Gen AI and AI, how will there be a job market for me? And I told him, well, there will be, for the very simple reason that your job will not be to run the calculations that the machine can run. Your job will be to make sure that it doesn't tell you something that is completely wrong, that it designs a car that a 3-year-old would design. Well, maybe it's a good seller, right? But in general, this is where we human beings have a differential regarding it. Of course, as we move on, technologies will continue to evolve. We don't know where it will end. As far as I know, we don't know what will happen when we put an AI and we plug it into a quantum computer, and it becomes massively more intelligent than we are. And that's when we go back to the first point. It's the responsible use of AI. And of course, governments have a saying about that. I don't want to get too political, but it is important. And you see some of these big AI players even asking for regulation. So, I would probably say that we have to learn how to work with this new companion.
And this is like a good trajectory into next topic, right? Like it's a complete deviation from the topic, but a good trajectory. You started with university, was an engineer building gas stations, CFO of Accenture, working with global Accenture, and you have a lot of uncertainty about how modern technology disrupts your workflow, disrupts workforce in general. Throughout your journey, how has your attitude towards your personal money, finances have changed? Right? Where did you start from, and what is your thought process right now?
Oh, well, I would probably say that there are two milestones in my life that changed my approach to money. The first one was an Argentina level event in 2001. We entered into our largest crisis, derived from a number of converging effects, some external, some internal. And one of a sudden, most of my savings were gone. So it was like the government took 75% of my savings. It was very difficult, and it was converging with the moment the dot-com bubble. Those were the early days in which we could start using platforms to invest abroad rather than investing in country. And that opened up so I don't want to invest anymore on this. I'm going to be using this new technology, the early fintechs of the 2000s, and I'm going to start putting my money in other types of investments out there. Thank God I didn't buy Enron back then. The second one was, and this is a very personal one, my first child being born. There is a lot of wealth that my wife and I have built together. And I will always regard my wife as the best financial advisor that I could have ever come across. But when my daughter was born, I was already almost 40. I was a late dad. That definitely changed the way. And at the same time, I became far more inquisitive into where was I putting my money. It may be counterintuitive to say, well, you have a child, you should become more conservative. In my case, it played otherwise. I started saying, okay, it's a matter of how do I build wealth, not for me, but for them, so that they have at least a platform where they can build. And from an attitude perspective or a behavioral perspective, my wife and I, quite frankly, we've never bothered about it's my money, your money, it's our money. It's the same pot. We don't care. But what did change is that our communication about our finances dramatically changed. It's been changed for the past 10, 11 years. To the extreme that we have a weekly meeting to talk about it, to talk about our investments. And I believe, as I believe in my work day, that communication is the key. We speak every 15 days with the people that manage our investments for us. Mhm. Um, and we speak every week amongst us and say, okay, this is what we have, this is the results, this is what we're doing with this. And as our children grow, we will let them in. Because what I have seen in many cases with people that I know is that there is a break in that communication. And the moment that happens, you may find yourself in a point in which you need the help and you cannot explain what kind of help you need. And the more people that can help you, especially in your closest group, whether it is family, friends, trusted advisors, communicate.
And I think children's a good example. You have 3 children. Do you think their way of approaching money is significantly different to how you looked at it when you were their age, or is it the very same? Especially if they are raised in Dubai, where luxury is abundant, you look at like the glitz and the glam, and overspending's become a habit in general, and that it's not helped by the fact that there are like buy now, pay later schemes and everything. Do you feel that because of all these advantages that are there, do you think that how your kids approach money is different to how you would have wanted them to approach money?
I don't think they are particularly different from whether my wife or I were when we were their age. Well, I'm Argentine, my wife is Mexican, similar yet different cultures. I would probably say that the number one challenge that we have is keeping them with their feet on the ground. The UAE, and I have lived in many countries, the UAE has at the core of their ethos something that to me is very appealing. That I see a lot of people misinterpreting because of, how opulent it may appear. And it is that this is a country that is constantly reinventing itself, that it's thinking 20, 30, 40, 50 years ahead of our time. You may get confused with that. And it's not about the money, because in the end, money is a transactional aspect, very relevant, right? But the way we are teaching them how to deal with money is about what are you going to be using your money for in X number of, we cannot tell them years, but we tell them in terms of months. And when you live in a country like this, you have to think, of course, of the cost of opportunity. There is a lot of opportunities in the country, and I definitely have the highest regard for the people that run the country. But for us, it's not about don't spend on these, right? We of course do that when they come with I want another backpack. Well, you have 3, you don't need a 4th, right? But we do teach them how to look at the next 6 months, 12 months, so that by the time they get to the moment when they need to manage their own, hopefully, bigger pot of wealth, they think beyond, whether I want to buy this bag or that car.
And just on that, I feel like because your investment philosophy is so long-term, right? You do look at what am I building towards and what will I have left for my children in the future. This might be a fun one, but since you're in Dubai and you have been in Dubai for a good 5-6 years now, real estate is the biggest thing here. So what are your opinions on the real estate market here?
I have, quite frankly, I don't have a formed opinion, because it is quite unique. Yeah. And the fundamentals of it are probably unseen in any other country for at least, let's say, I would say probably 100 years, since the large immigration that you saw from Europe into the whole of the Americas. That sparked a housing bubble and eventually crisis. I think that here is managed differently because supply is constantly ahead of demand. So it's I don't have a proper formed opinion about it. If you ask me, we have not bought property here. And we have our properties back home and in Argentina and in Mexico, and we are okay with that.
I think the key is they're informed this again, Adam, the lease system.
Like any investment, real estate, it's a matter of what do you want it for? If you want a house, and this applies for whether the UAE or any other country, if you want a house because you want to live in there, well, the value of the house, it's relative to the use that you're going to give it. If you want it as an investment, well, that becomes speculative. And when it becomes speculative, then you have to dig deeper into the fundamentals of it. That's why I don't have an informed point in that. Well, I'll give you an example. In Switzerland, property has constantly gone up in price since there is a housing market. You can buy a property in Switzerland. You can sell that property in Switzerland. You have a very good proxy on where it will go in terms of price. And the fundamentals of that is Switzerland is a country where there is a permanent influx of money. So it is recirculated, and it's a beautiful country, of course. Money is recirculated, so prices go up, and they have certain governmental regulation. If I go to Argentina, the fundamentals of the real estate market is, well, I woke up one morning and I wanted my apartment to be worth $3,000 a square meter. It's okay. Someone will buy it because there is a volume of people, and if there is demand, someone will buy it. Here is different. And I have not yet been able to decipher how the market is driven. Whether it is the demand, probably one case, whether it be because there is an excess of liquidity and people want to, whether it is a demographic matter, you know that the UAE has a plan to double its population in the next 15 or 20 years. So this is more of me not having enough information about that.
You also lived in so many countries, but I think it's nice to go back home, right? Argentina. And taking a very lighter subject, what was the vibe, or Gen Z term vibe, or the behavior? I don't know, what is the older way of saying vibe? Culture. Yeah, what was the cultural impact of Argentina winning the World Cup in?
Well, okay, so this is where I become serious, right? Now, there are very few countries whose national identity is defined by a sport. I am personally a rugby man, right? I love rugby, but like any other Argentine, the football runs through my veins. There is a part of our character that is also reflected in music, that we are sort of melancholic. And since 1986 and 1993, last time we won anything, we had been living out of, those yellowing images of Maradona's goal and lifting the World Cup in Mexico, winning the World Cup in 2022. And I have been in multiple World Cups. I've traveled. I've been in a couple World Cup finals. I was there in Qatar last year. Sorry, 2 years ago now. It was, for a country that has been living for the past, say, 50 years in a permanent economical crisis, it was a breath of fresh air to renew that sense of, well, we are proud Argentines. Mm-hmm. I hope that, and I definitely, I took the chance of writing a note to our ambassador to tell them that this is a great opportunity to recreate our national identity. Mm-hmm. It was a moment of communion for all of us. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I was so happy to be at the stadium, watching it, living it. At the same time, I was very sad that I could not be down in Argentina to go celebrate the occasion. It was a momentous event for all of us, and I'm still, I can still feel. I can tell you, I have watched that game probably like 50 times.
I remember filling out a fan zone here in Dubai. So it was in the December, flown back from university, and it was absolutely filled to the brim with Argentinian shirts. My friend who's been a Messi fan all his life, I have never seen him weep the way he wept that night, because I swear to you, that game will go down.
Well, I was in Sharjah watching the game with a bunch of people. Man, it was, I'm not an Argentine. I have nothing to do. Very far away, to be honest, right? There's something about Messi winning that World Cup was like something like, it just, you just like.
No, my grandmother was French. Because I'm partly French. Mm-hmm. My cousin lives in France, in Lyon. Mm-hmm. Of course, there is a limit to how much can we celebrate within the family. Yes. So and of course, half of my family, they're Mexicans, and we beat Mexico during the World Cup. So it was one of those moments in which I was so happy, right? And I couldn't necessarily do it openly, right? I was celebrating how I would want to do it, and with an outburst of emotion, which is very uncharacteristic. I'm not the most emotional man, but you can see that I'm getting hyped by it. That had to contain myself and say, okay, there are some things that I cannot say, right? I have to keep them to myself, and I'll celebrate at home, and yeah, okay, brilliant.
It must have been very tough. Like, your heart must have been filled with joy.
And that game particularly was like a heart, palpitating. Yeah, because like they scored the first goal, and it was like, I think this is done. It's a close deal. And then out of nowhere, Mbappe comes in, like, slides one in.
So in 2014, I was living in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro. The same day the final with Germany was taking place, a friend of mine calls home 5 a.m., talks to my wife and says, I've got tickets for the final. Tell Mario we're going. I woke up at 8 a.m. My wife tells me, listen, you've got tickets for the final. Go. I look at my wife and say, like, you're absolutely crazy. There is those tickets. My friend called me again, told me, yes, go there. We were so excited. The chance of winning the World Cup in Brazil, which have been our football rivals forever, as you probably know. They call themselves the football nation. We call ourselves the football nation. There is, yeah, well, I mean, that may not necessarily be the the metric that you want me to look at. But jokes aside, I have tons of Brazilian friends. I love Brazil. It's my second home. If I retire, I told my wife I want to retire in Brazil because it's a beautiful country. But we go to the final. Everyone's so excited. I was there with my friend. And we lost. It was horrible. And losing at the 118th minute was terrible. So picture this. We were winning 2-0. 75 minutes of basically erasing the best team in the world. And I have to say that my favorite to win the World Cup was France. Mm-hmm. And for 75 minutes, we have wiped them out. And then in 60 seconds, the genius of a fantastic football player, Mbappe, ties the game. When he tied it, I was, oh God, not again. God, no, it cannot be me. It needs to be someone else. 3-2, 3-3, then that magical save in the last second by Diego Martinez. And we were behind the goal where the penalties were taken. I remember very few things of the final, right? But the last thing I do recall from it, because again, the level of emotion, is Gonzalo Montiel, who happened to be a player that was born in the club that I'm a fan of, River Plate. By the way, for the audience, it's the best club in South America, right? And takes the ball, and I turned around and told my wife, we just won. He had never failed a penalty in his career. So the moment he got the ball, I already knew that we were world champions. And it was so relieving to see him walking. I didn't even recall how he hit the penalty. Well, now I know because I saw it in YouTube, but it's just like, it's a goal. Okay, give us the World Cup. It's done. That was the biggest sporting moment in my life. Only probably paired to River Plate winning the Copa Libertadores against Boca Juniors in Madrid in 2018, which is the biggest club-level final ever played. The game finished 2 a.m. and there was I in a hotel room all by myself, screaming, yelling. And the front desk clerk came and said, "Sir, please stop yelling." I'm not going to stop yelling. We just won the final against our forever rivals. No. It was probably paired to that.
Nice way to end the episode. Thank you so much for coming. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for coming on. I think you've educated quite a lot of people in consulting, and honestly, we've learned a lot from this conversation. So thank you so much.
Guys, for inviting me, and I always say this to everyone. I'm very open to connecting with everyone. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook. It's an old guy stuff, I know, but you can find me on LinkedIn. Connect through it, and I'm happy to speak to anyone.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.